After 10 years of marriage and pouring my soul into his restaurant dreams, my husband banned me from his flagship location's grand opening. "You'll embarrass me," Mark said. From Brewhaven across the street in Seattle, Washington, I watched celebrities arrive, their laughter drifting through the chilly October night, a stark contrast to the ache in my chest. Then I made one phone call, to a man who owed me a favor. "I don't want you at the opening, Emma," Mark said, standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd spent countless nights refining his signature dishes, cheering his first pop-up's triumph, and holding him when his second location nearly crumbled. "You'll embarrass me in front of the real guests." His words struck like a cold blade, slicing through a decade of shared dreams. I stood there, nodding, forcing a smile, but inside, something fractured, a crack that had been widening for years, built on sacrifices he no longer acknowledged. 10 years. That's how long I'd poured myself into Mark's vision, believing it was ours, a shared ambition to create something extraordinary in Seattle's vibrant culinary scene. If you value stories of quiet strength and hidden resilience, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps reach women who need to hear this. Now, let's unravel how this story unfolded, from love to betrayal to a reckoning delivered in silence. We began as broke college sweethearts in a cramped Capitol Hill apartment, where the walls seemed to close in with every unpaid bill. Mark worked night shifts at a diner, coming home with burns on his forearms and stories of customers who tipped in loose change or complaints. I juggled 2 jobs, mornings steaming milk at a bustling coffee shop, where the hiss of the espresso machine was my soundtrack, and evenings hunched over my laptop, freelancing graphic design for small businesses. We had nothing but each other and Mark's audacious dream to cook his way to greatness. "One day, we'll build something incredible together," he'd whisper on those late nights when exhaustion made hope feel like a distant star. "You and me, Emma, will show Seattle what real food can be." His words were a lifeline, and I clung to them, believing with every fiber of my being. To fund his culinary school, I took out a student loan in my name, the monthly payments a silent burden I carried alone. When he needed professional-grade knives, I sold my grandmother's jewelry, her sapphire ring and pearl earrings, pieces she'd worn with quiet pride, now traded for his ambition. When he spoke of his first pop-up, I cashed in half my inheritance, $25,000 left by my parents after a car accident stole them from me, meant to be my safety net. "This is an investment in us," Mark said, his kiss on my forehead sealing the bank papers as I signed away my security. "Everything I build, we build together." Those words were my anchor, even as the we began to erode, slipping away like sand through an hourglass, unnoticed in the rush of his rising star. I was a graphic designer then, not just competent, but genuinely talented, with a roster of clients who valued my creativity. I designed logos for Seattle startups, crafting their identities with bold lines and vibrant colors. I created marketing materials for local nonprofits, pouring hours into flyers that told their stories. I even worked on layouts for a regional magazine, my designs gracing glossy pages. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, a world I'd built through late nights and relentless determination. Then Mark's Asian fusion concept, Taste Fusion, took off, and I became his shadow, my own light dimming in his growing spotlight. It happened so gradually I barely noticed. He asked me to design his menus, just temporarily, until he could afford a real designer. Then he needed help with bookkeeping because his accountant's fees were too steep. When his hostess called in sick, I stepped in, smiling through long shifts in a crowded dining room. When his social media manager quit, I took over the Instagram account, curating posts that showcased his dishes to Seattle's foodies. "You're so good at this," Mark would say, his cheek kisses feeling more like obligations as I worked late into the night, tweaking fonts and balancing spreadsheets. "Why would I pay someone else when I have you?" Each time I said yes, I lost a piece of myself. My clients slipped away, unable to wait as I prioritized Mark's needs. My portfolio stagnated, untouched for months. My identity blurred until I couldn't tell where Emma the designer ended and Emma the restaurant wife began, a role I hadn't chosen but had somehow slipped into. Mark changed too, reshaped by success in ways that cut deeper than I expected. The man who once shared ramen and dreams began to shift, his warmth replaced by ambition's sharp edges. He stopped asking about my day, his conversations turning from food to phrases like elevated dining experience and culinary artistry. He traded my clumsy bathroom haircuts for salon styles, his new cologne sharp and costly, a scent that clung to him like his new persona. At Seattle's industry events, held in sleek downtown venues with clinking glasses and power players, he used to introduce me with pride. My wife Emma, the brilliant designer who created our visual branding. Then it became my wife Emma, a title stripped of meaning, a placeholder. Eventually, he stopped introducing me altogether, leaving me to linger on the edges of crowded rooms, a glass of wine my only companion. "You make things awkward around investors," he said after a cocktail party at a Seattle hotel, where I'd stood alone for 2 hours, watching him charm venture capitalists and food critics. "They want to talk business, and when you're there, they feel obliged to make small talk." His words landed like a dismissal, but I pushed back, my voice trembling with frustration. "I can talk business," I said. "I've been part of this from the beginning." "Mark?" He laughed, a sound that felt like a door slamming shut. "You're not really in the industry, Emma. It's different when it's your actual profession." The truth in his words stung. I wasn't a chef, a restaurateur, or a critic. I was just the woman who'd given up her career to build his, and now I was invisible, even to him. I became wallpaper at his events, present but unseen, blending into the background of Seattle's glittering culinary world. Staff who'd worked at his restaurants for months were surprised to learn he was married, their eyes widening when I mentioned my role. Food bloggers interviewing him focused on his vision, never asking about his personal life, as if I didn't exist. I was a ghost in the empire we'd once dreamed of together, my presence erased from the narrative Mark was crafting. Then Claire swept into our lives, a polished tornado in designer clothes that screamed wealth and power, the wife of one of Mark's major investors. She'd launched a PR firm specializing in hospitality brands, her reputation preceding her like a spotlight. Her platinum blonde hair was always flawless. Her outfits, tailored dresses and stilettos, cost more than our monthly mortgage. Her voice carried a confident authority that made rooms lean in, hanging on her every word. At a Seattle dinner party, held in a chic loft with views of the Puget Sound, she leaned toward me, her smile sharp as a blade. "Mark has incredible potential," she said, her tone both kind and cutting. "But he needs the right support to break through to the next level." Her words lingered, a warning I didn't fully grasp until it was too late. I should have seen it coming. The private meetings labeled brand strategy, where Mark and Claire spent hours behind closed doors, his sudden shift to tailored suits and practice sound bites, as if he were auditioning for a role. The media training sessions I wasn't invited to observe, leaving me on the outside of his transformation. He started calling our restaurants my concept, erasing the hour that had once defined us. "Claire says successful restaurateurs are personalities first, chefs second," he explained when I questioned his new wardrobe, the price tags making my stomach twist with unease. "What about what I think?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, hoping for a shred of the partnership we'd had. He paused, and in that silence, I heard my answer, a void where our shared dream used to be. The betrayals weren't grand gestures, but small, relentless cuts that bled me dry. At dinner parties, he corrected my stories with a patronizing smile, as if my memories were flawed. He steered conversations away when guests asked about our partnership, dismissing my contributions with a wave. He grew embarrassed of our modest Capitol Hill home, with its creaky floors and mismatched furniture, and our old car, a relic from our early days, at a Seattle food and wine festival, where the air smelled of truffle oil and ambition. Claire delivered the sharpest blow. "You dilute his brand," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, like she was commenting on the vintage of the wine in her hand. "Mark needs to appeal to a certain demographic, and a wife who looks like a suburban aunt sends the wrong message about his sophistication." I went home and stared in the mirror. My reflection a stranger. When had I become a prop in Mark's story, an accessory he no longer wanted to display? The final blow came 3 weeks ago, when Mark announced the grand opening of Horizon, his flagship restaurant, a project I'd helped fund with my inheritance and shaped with countless late-night brainstorming sessions over coffee and notebooks. "The guest list is incredibly exclusive," he said over breakfast, scrolling his phone with a focus that excluded me. "Claire confirmed food influencers, local celebrities, and investors who could bankroll our expansion." I pictured myself there, standing by his side as we'd always done. "What time should I be ready?" I asked, already choosing a dress in my mind, something understated but elegant. He looked up, his eyes heavy with pity, a look I'd never seen from him before. "Actually, Emma, I think it's better if you stay home for this one." My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor, the sound echoing in the silence between us. Neither of us moved to clean it. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is a big night for my career," he said, his tone careful but firm. "Claire worked hard to get the right people there." He paused, searching for words to soften the blow, but they came anyway, sharp and final. "You'll embarrass me in front of the real guests." Real guests, as if I wasn't real, as if 10 years of marriage, sacrifice, and love weren't enough to earn me a place at the table I'd helped build. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I smiled, because it was all I knew to do, a reflex from years of smoothing over his dismissals. But that night, as I watched Mark practice his opening remarks in front of our bedroom mirror, his gestures polished and confident, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who'd given everything for his dream was gone. The one who remained had her own plans, and they didn't include standing in his shadow. For 3 days, I moved through our house like a ghost, cooking meals he barely touched, folding laundry that belonged to a man who saw me as a liability. I stared at my reflection, searching for the woman I'd been, wondering when I'd become so easy to discard. On the 4th evening, as Mark rehearsed his speech in the living room, gesturing grandly to an imaginary crowd while I sat invisible on the couch, I remembered James Carter, a man whose quiet gratitude had stayed with me. 5 years ago, at Taste Fusion, Mark's Korean-Mexican fusion food truck parked outside a Seattle community college. A health department van pulled up during the lunch rush. Mark's face went pale, his hands wiping nervously on his apron as he muttered about delayed permits. The inspector, James Carter, was tall and graying, with a meticulous air, his clipboard clutched tightly, pen already uncapped. "Routine inspection," he said, his tone professional but firm. "This shouldn't take long if everything's in order." Mark nodded, leading him to the truck's service window, his anxiety palpable. I stayed back, organizing napkin dispensers, trying to look busy while James began his methodical examination. Everything went smoothly until he opened the refrigeration unit. His face changed, distress flickered across it, a shadow of something deeper than professional concern. His knuckles whitened on the counter, his breathing turned rapid and shallow, his clipboard trembling in his hands. Mark stood frozen, more worried about his inspection than the man struggling before him. I recognized the signs from my college roommate, who'd battled panic attacks that left her shaking. Stepping forward, I spoke softly. "Hey, you need to sit down." James's eyes were wild, unfocused, but I guided him to a plastic chair behind the truck, away from the curious students gathering nearby. "What's your name?" I asked, crouching beside him to keep him grounded. "James," he managed between ragged breaths. "I can't. You're having a panic attack, but you're safe," I said, my voice steady, a calm I'd learned to summon in crises. "Feel the chair beneath you. It's solid. You're breathing." Without him noticing, I scrolled through his phone and found "Home Susan." His wife answered on the second ring, her voice thick with worry. "Mrs. Carter, this is Emma. I'm with James at the community college food truck area in Seattle. He's having an episode, but he's okay. I'll stay with him." I coached James through grounding exercises I'd learned from my roommate. Name 5 things you can see: the truck, the students, the sky, your clipboard, my hands. 4 things you can touch: the chair, your shirt, the counter, your pen. His breathing slowed, his focus returning. The students are watching, he whispered, shame creeping into his voice. No one's watching. I lied gently as Mark dispersed the small crowd, his own worry fixed on the inspection. Just focus on getting through this. Susan arrived 20 minutes later, a petite woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair, her face etched with relief and gratitude. She thanked me repeatedly, helping James to their car with a promise to see their family doctor. You didn't have to do that, James said, his voice steadier but still fragile. Anyone would have, I replied, brushing it off. He shook his head slowly. No, they wouldn't. Most would have called 911 and walked away. You stayed. You saw me as a person, not a problem. Mark's inspection was marked and complete, but James returned a week later, passing Taste Fusion with a clean report and leaving me a potted orchid, its delicate purple blooms a quiet gesture. Susan grows these, he said, a touch embarrassed. I wanted to give you something, but I wasn't sure what was appropriate. From that day, we shared a gentle friendship, nothing complicated, just 2 people who'd connected in a vulnerable moment. Every Christmas, a card arrived, signed by James and Susan Carter, their neat handwriting a small constant in my life. When I sent a congratulations card for his promotion to senior inspector, he called to thank me. You probably don't remember me, he began. Of course I do, I interrupted. How could I forget? The turning point came 2 years ago, when James's Christmas card arrived in different handwriting, his shakier, without Susan's neat script. I called immediately. Susan moved out last month, he admitted after my gentle prodding. 28 years of marriage, and she said she couldn't handle my anxiety anymore. Felt like she was walking on eggshells. Without thinking, I drove to his Seattle apartment that weekend, bringing a container of homemade chocolate chip cookies, their warmth a small comfort, and a handwritten letter. Dear James, I wrote, you are so much more than your worst moments. You're kind, thorough, dedicated to keeping people safe. You saw me as a person worth helping when you returned for Mark's inspection, when you could have failed us and moved on. Susan's leaving doesn't define your worth. You are more than this heartbreak. Your friend, Emma. He called me days later, his voice thick with grateful tears. You're the kindest stranger I've met, he said. Except you're not a stranger anymore, are you? Now, watching Mark rehearse his grand opening speech, oblivious to my presence on the couch, I knew James understood the art of quiet revenge. I walked to the kitchen, far enough that Mark couldn't hear, and dialed James's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, the faint hum of a TV news program in the background. Emma, is everything okay? He asked, concern in his voice. I stared out at Seattle's darkening skyline, the Space Needle a distant silhouette, and felt a calm certainty settle in my chest, a feeling I hadn't known in years. James, I need a favor, I said, the biggest one I'll ever ask. I told him about Horizon, Claire's real guests comment, and being banned from the opening of a restaurant I'd helped build with my own hands and money. I didn't dwell on the decade of marriage or the slow erasure of my identity, just the facts, laid out like ingredients for a dish I wanted to serve with precision. The silence stretched until I thought the call had dropped. Then James spoke, his voice steady. Send me the menu supply list and vendor information. I'll handle the rest. I hesitated. James, I don't want you to risk your job. Emma, he said gently. I'm not doing anything illegal or unethical. I'm just doing my job, thoroughly, legally, quietly. Those words sent a shiver of satisfaction down my spine, a promise of justice delivered without fanfare. That's all I need, I whispered. 2 days before the grand opening. James visited Horizon. Mark wouldn't remember him, just another inspector among dozens over the years. But James remembered me and what it meant to be seen as a person worth saving. Sometimes, The most powerful favors require no rules to be broken, just a meticulous hand to wield them. I chose a gray dress, bought for a funeral but never worn, its muted tone perfect for blending into the evening shadows of Seattle's bustling streets. I positioned myself at Brew Haven, directly across from Horizon, Mark's flagship restaurant with its pretentious name, a choice Claire had championed. The cafe stayed open late on weekends, its warm lights a contrast to the cold knot in my stomach. The barista barely glanced at me as I ordered a single espresso and claimed the window table, my eyes fixed on the scene unfolding across the street. The red carpet glowed under spotlights, photographers snapped eagerly, and guests arrived in sleek cars that spoke of wealth beyond my world. The October air carried their laughter, rehearsed, performative, the sound of networking in Seattle's cutthroat culinary scene. At exactly 7:30, Mark emerged from Horizon's front doors, resplendent in the navy suit Claire had selected, its tailored lines accentuating his transformation. His posture was straighter, his smile wider, his gestures grander than the man who'd once practiced knife skills in our tiny Capitol Hill kitchen, flour dusting his hands. He'd become Claire's creation, the visionary chef, the culinary artist, a man who belonged among Seattle's elite, far removed from the dreamer I'd loved. Photographers moved like a choreographed dance, their flashbulbs creating bursts of artificial daylight as Mark paused at designated spots, turning his head to showcase his best angles. A performance Claire had undoubtedly scripted. Then Claire appeared beside him, and my breath caught in my throat. Her backless emerald dress shimmered, its price likely exceeding my monthly grocery budget. Her platinum hair swept into an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the camera flashes like stars. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone born for this world, not someone who'd clawed their way up from food trucks and borrowed money, as we had. From across the street, I watched them work the crowd together. Claire leaned in to whisper something in Mark's ear. He laughed as if her words were pure genius, then approached the next cluster of guests with renewed energy. They were a team, a power couple, the kind that graced Seattle's magazine covers and society pages. In that moment, I saw it with painful clarity. Claire was the woman Mark wanted by his side, not me. The guest list was a who's who of Seattle's culinary and social scene, the restaurant critic from the Seattle Times, whose reviews could elevate or destroy, a food photographer with 500,000 Instagram followers, her posts shaping trends, a morning show host known for weekend dining segments, her presence a stamp of approval. These were Mark's real guests, whose opinions could make or break Horizon with a single post or review. My phone buzzed with a text, and for a moment, my heart leaped, hoping Mark had changed his mind. Instead, it was a photo from my neighbor, showing our cat, Muffin, asleep in a patch of evening sunlight, keeping me company while you're out. Hope you're having a wonderful evening. The irony twisted in my chest like a knife. Even my neighbor assumed I was at the opening, dressed in my finest, standing proudly beside my husband as he achieved his greatest dream. The reality, sitting alone in Brew Haven, wearing a funeral dress, watching my marriage's death scene through a window, was too surreal to explain. Through Horizon's tall windows, I saw the dining room come alive with elegantly dressed guests, the space glowing with warm lighting, exposed brick walls, and carefully curated artwork I recognized from galleries Claire had posted about on Instagram. It was a polished version of the vision boards I'd created 3 years ago, when Mark first dreamed of this location, sketching ideas on napkins in our kitchen. Now, those ideas were credited to a professional designer whose name would appear in the restaurant's glossy brochures, not mine. Servers moved with practiced efficiency, carrying silver trays laden with Mark's signature appetizers, Korean-spiced short rib sliders, a recipe we'd perfected in our home kitchen, now presented on bone china plates with microgreen garnishes that probably cost $5 a sprig. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over me as I watched guests sample dishes I'd helped create. I remembered late nights in our Capitol Hill apartment, Mark experimenting with flavor combinations while I offered feedback, my palate untrained but honest. The thrill when he nailed a new technique, the laughter when a sauce went wrong, The dreams we shared of a day when people would pay premium prices to experience his culinary vision. Those dreams were coming true tonight, but I was no longer part of them, erased from the story Mark was telling the world. At 8:15, Mark stepped onto Horizon's front steps, calling for attention with a practiced raise of his hand. The crowd quieted, their polite expectation honed from countless Seattle galas and openings. He launched into his prepared remarks, thanking investors for their belief in his vision, praising his amazing team for their dedication, and expressing gratitude for the support of Seattle's culinary community. His words were polished, his delivery confident, but they carried a weight I hadn't expected, a narrative of a solo journey, as if he'd built Horizon alone. I waited for my name, even a vague mention of my wife's unwavering support, a nod to the decade I'd spent by his side. It never came. Claire stood behind him, nodding at the right moments, her smile perfect and professional, a silent partner in his rewritten history. The applause was enthusiastic but measured, as if the guests were still deciding whether to cast Mark in the role he so desperately wanted to play. My coffee had grown cold, but I sipped it anyway, needing something to anchor my hands as I watched this elaborate performance unfold. A few late guests trickled in, including the food editor for Seattle's premier lifestyle magazine, a woman whose review could launch a restaurant into the stratosphere or consign it to obscurity. Then I noticed James, his arrival so quiet I nearly missed it, despite watching for him. He wore his standard health department uniform, khaki pants, light blue shirt, official badge clearly visible. He carried a clipboard, disposable gloves, and a small cooler I knew held testing equipment and sample containers. No one paid him attention. Health inspectors were background noise at events like this, a bureaucratic necessity ignored by successful establishments. He nodded politely to the hostess, flashed his credentials, and slipped into the kitchen as the celebration continued in the dining room, oblivious to the storm about to break. I found myself holding my breath, though I couldn't say exactly what I was hoping for. James had promised to do his job thoroughly, legally, quietly, not revenge or vindication, just a meticulous inspection with a reason to look closer than usual. As guests lifted their forks to taste the first course of Mark's exclusive tasting menu, James stepped into the dining room, his presence a sudden disruption. The room fell silent, a collective pause as 50 people sensed something had gone terribly wrong. He stood in the archway between the kitchen and dining area, his clipboard held against his chest like a shield, his expression professionally neutral despite the weight of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. "I'm James Carter with the Seattle Environmental Health Department. I need to interrupt this evening's festivities." Mark's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, the golden liquid catching the light. Claire's perfect smile flickered for a moment before snapping back into place, though I could see confusion in her eyes, even from across the street. The food blogger, who'd been photographing her appetizer with meticulous care, slowly lowered her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. James reached into his folder and withdrew a printed report, the official health department letterhead, stark and unmistakable, even from my distant perch at Brewhaven. "Lab results show the presence of banned preservatives in your imported caviar," he announced, his tone matter-of-fact, belying the devastating impact of his words. Specifically, potassium benzoate at levels 3 times FDA guidelines. Additionally, your refrigeration logs indicate irregular temperature fluctuations over the past 48 hours. The walk-in cooler recorded temperatures of 46 degrees for a cumulative 6 hours yesterday afternoon, posing a significant contamination risk for your protein storage. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests, the sound carrying through Brewhaven's windows, a sharp intake of breath that echoed my own. Heads turned, eyebrows raised, and phones slipped discreetly from purses and pockets as guests began to process the news. The lifestyle magazine editor's fork clattered against her plate, a small but audible betrayal of her composure. Mark's face flushed a deep red, clashing with the navy suit Claire had chosen so carefully. He stepped forward, his media training kicking in as he tried to reclaim control of the narrative. "Now, hold on," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the silent room. I'm sure this is just some kind of technical misunderstanding. These things happen in the restaurant business, right? A little paperwork mix-up, maybe some calibration issues with the thermometers. But no one laughed with him. The morning show host had already pushed her plate away, her expression a mix of disgust and caution. The Instagram influencer was filming, her phone held discreetly at table level, whispering commentary for her stories. James remained unmoved by Mark's attempted charm offensive, his posture steady, his voice calm but firm. Sir, food safety isn't a technicality. These violations pose genuine health risks to your patrons. He reached into his folder again and withdrew a formal notice, its bright yellow paper glaring under the restaurant's warm lighting. I'm issuing a temporary suspension of your food service license, effective immediately, pending a complete reinspection and remediation of these issues. The words hit the room like a physical blow, reverberating through the silence. Claire stepped forward, her PR instincts finally kicking in, her voice maintaining its polished tone despite the chaos unfolding around her. I'm sure we can work something out, she said, her smile tight. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, away from the guests. James's expression didn't change, his professionalism unyielding. Ma'am, when public health is at risk, there's nothing to discuss privately. The notice is effective immediately. Mark tried one last desperate gambit, his voice rising with a mix of panic and bravado. Look, James, can I call you James? We've got some very important people here tonight. Food critics, investors, media. Surely we can handle this after the event. I promise you. First thing Monday morning. James interrupted, using Mark's last name with a formal distance that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Mr. Thompson, I don't care if the president himself is sitting at table 12. When I find food safety violations this serious, service stops immediately. The camera flashes turned frantic, no longer capturing a triumphant debut, but a scandal unfolding in real time. The food blogger was typing furiously on her phone, her thumbs a blur. Someone near the back of the room was already making quiet phone calls, likely to editors or producers eager for a scoop. I watched Mark's face cycle through emotions like a broken slot machine. Confusion, anger, humiliation, desperation. This was supposed to be his coronation, the night that established him as a serious player in Seattle's culinary scene. Instead, it was becoming a public execution of his reputation, played out under the harsh glare of camera lenses. I think there's been some kind of mistake, Mark said, his voice rising slightly, panic overriding his media training. We source everything from premium suppliers. Our caviar comes from a renowned European distributor. There's no way. James cut him off, holding up the report again, his tone measured but unyielding. The lab results are conclusive, Mr. Thompson. Your European distributor appears to be using preservatives that are legal in some countries, but banned for import here. It's more common than you might think with luxury ingredients. Claire was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to spin this disaster into something manageable, her fingers moving with the urgency of someone watching her carefully curated event implode. But around the room, I could see the guests making their own calculations. The lifestyle magazine editor stood, her purse in hand, her face a mask of polite withdrawal. The local celebrity couple was whispering urgently, their expressions a mix of shock and second-hand embarrassment. That's when the exodus began, swift and merciless. You know what? The morning show host said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, cutting through the murmurs. I'm not risking my stomach for an Instagram post. I've got a show to tape tomorrow. Her declaration broke the spell, holding the other guests in place. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as people stood. Napkins dropped onto plates, half-eaten appetizers abandoned. The quiet murmur of polite excuses filled the air, a chorus of discomfort. Can't believe I skipped canless for this, one man muttered to his companion as they headed for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the emptying space. Mark stood in the center of the dining room, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides, like a captain watching his ship sink beneath him. Claire was still on her phone, probably calling in favors or drafting a statement, but even she seemed to realize this fire was beyond extinguishing. The restaurant staff looked on helplessly, their grand opening transformed into a public relations nightmare. Servers stood frozen, holding trays of untouched food, unsure whether to serve or clear. The sommelier paused mid-pour, a bottle of expensive wine hovering over an abandoned glass, the liquid catching the light like a mockery of the evening's promise. James methodically posted the health department notice on Horizon's front window, the yellow paper a stark contrast to the sleek glass, a scarlet letter for all of Seattle to see. The photographers captured that moment too, the official seal glaring in their shots, a permanent record of the night's collapse. Within 20 minutes, the restaurant was nearly empty, save for the staff, a few stragglers unsure if they could leave, and Mark, standing alone amidst the wreckage of his dreams. By the time I finished my cold coffee and walked home through Seattle's quiet streets, the story was already breaking on social media. Flagship launch, shut down for food safety violations, topped the food blogger's Instagram, her post racking up thousands of likes. Caviar catastrophe at celebrity chef's debut screamed the headline on the morning show's website, the words as sharp as the reality they described. I didn't need to share the story myself. Seattle's food scene was doing it for me, the news spreading like wildfire. My phone started ringing at 11:30 that night, Mark's ringtone cutting through the silence of our Capitol Hill house. I was in the bathtub by then, a glass of wine balanced on the tub's edge, the warm water a small comfort as I watched the local news replay footage of the evening's disaster. I let the call go to voicemail, the sound fading into the background. A second call came 5 minutes later, then a third, each time. I reached over and declined, watching his name light up my screen before going dark again, a silent refusal to engage. The 11 o'clock news led with the story, the anchor's voice crisp and authoritative. A highly anticipated restaurant opening turned into a food safety nightmare tonight, she said, as footage of James posting the notice played behind her. Sources say a tip to health officials led to the surprise inspection that shut down the event. I smiled at that detail, the mysterious tip that had led to James's perfectly timed inspection. It wasn't technically true, but it made for a better story than the reality of an old friendship and a favor quietly called in. I poured another glass of wine and sank deeper into the warm water, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't known in years, the satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, exactly when I needed to be there, even if that place was alone in my bathtub, watching my husband's dreams crumble on the evening news. The phone calls started again at 6:30 Friday morning, less than 48 hours after James's yellow notice was posted on Horizon's front window. I was making coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me, when Mark's phone rang for the 8th time in 10 minutes, each call lasting just long enough for someone to deliver bad news before hanging up. Michael Steinberg just pulled his investment, Mark said, his voice hollow as he stared at his phone screen, the light casting shadows on his tired face. $200,000. Gone. I poured my coffee slowly, saying nothing, letting the silence speak for me. Michael had been one of Mark's earliest believers, a Seattle businessman who'd seen potential in taste fusion and helped fund the first brick-and-mortar location. His withdrawal wasn't just financial, it was a vote of no confidence that would ripple through Seattle's tight-knit investor community. He's not the only one, Mark continued, scrolling through his missed calls with a growing sense of panic. Jennifer Chen wants a refund on her entire stake, says her husband's law firm can't be associated with food safety violations, and David Morrison. He paused, his face growing paler, the lines around his eyes deepening. David's threatening to sue for false representation, claims I misled him about our supplier relationships. I watched his empire begin to collapse. Each phone call a detonation in a carefully orchestrated demolition, tearing down the structure he'd built on my money and promises. My silence was my response, a refusal to offer comfort or solutions, a choice to let him face the consequences alone. Claire's damage control efforts, which had begun with frantic phone calls the night of the shutdown, were unraveling. Her carefully cultivated media contacts stopped returning her calls. their silence a damning verdict. The Seattle Times, which had planned a glowing feature on Horizon, cited space constraints and pulled the piece. A Food Network producer, once eager to pitch a show about Mark's rise from food trucks to fine dining, went radio silent, her interest extinguished by the scandal. "No one wants to touch us right now," Claire admitted during a tense phone conversation I couldn't help but overhear. Her voice strained as she paced in our living room. "The story has too much traction. Every food blog in Seattle is covering it. My other clients are starting to ask questions about their association with my firm." By Tuesday, the staff exodus began, a slow bleed that turned into a hemorrhage. Marcus Rodriguez, the head chef Mark had poached from a respected downtown Seattle restaurant, submitted his resignation via email at 7 in the morning. His message was professionally worded but devastating in its implications. "Given recent developments and concerns about food safety protocols, I feel it's in my best interest to seek opportunities elsewhere." Marcus had been Mark's crown jewel, a classically trained chef with impeccable credentials and a following among Seattle's serious food enthusiasts. His departure sent a clear signal to the culinary community that Horizon's problems ran deeper than a single health department citation. The sous chef, Carmen Torres, followed Marcus out the door, but not before ensuring the industry knew why. Screenshots of text messages began circulating on social media, shared in a private Seattle chef group on Facebook, exposing Mark's negligence. "Boss says the European stuff is fine," one message read, sent from Carmen to a colleague. "Higher profit margins. He says, customers won't know the difference." Another showed Mark dismissing concerns about the walk-in cooler's temperature fluctuations. "It's fine. Just adjust the logs if anyone asks. These health inspectors don't know restaurant operations like we do." The messages painted a damning picture of a chef more concerned with profit than safety, someone willing to cut corners to impress investors and maximize returns. Seattle's culinary community, which valued reputation above almost everything else, began distancing itself from Mark with ruthless efficiency. Within a week, 3 more kitchen staff members had quit, followed by 2 servers and the sommelier, each citing the growing scandal as their reason. Each departure was another crack in Horizon's foundation, another signal that working there had become a liability rather than a career asset. Mark's response to the mounting crisis was perhaps the most damaging decision he could have made. Instead of accepting responsibility and working quietly to rebuild trust, he chose to fight back publicly, a move that backfired spectacularly. On Thursday morning, a 5-minute video appeared on Horizon's Instagram account, filmed in the empty restaurant, with Mark standing behind the chef's counter in his pristine white coat, addressing the camera with barely controlled anger. "What happened last Friday was the result of a malicious vendetta," he declared, his voice rising as he spoke, his hands gesturing wildly. "Someone with a personal grudge against me orchestrated this entire situation. This wasn't a random inspection, it was sabotage, pure and simple, by jealous competitors who can't stand to see someone succeed who came up the hard way, who built something from nothing." I watched the video from my laptop, my coffee growing cold as I witnessed Mark's public meltdown in real time. He looked haggard, his usual media polish replaced by the desperate energy of someone watching their life's work disintegrate. The comments flooded in immediately, a mix of sympathy from a few loyal supporters and scathing criticism from the majority. "Dude, you literally ignored supplier warnings," one commenter wrote, attaching a screenshot of Carmen's leaked texts. "How is that sabotage?" another added. "Playing the victim when you put people's health at risk? Classy." Food bloggers picked apart his claims with forensic precision, pointing out that health inspections in Seattle are random and regulated, not subject to personal vendettas. The Seattle Times restaurant critic published a scathing editorial on accountability in the food service industry, using Mark's video as a prime example of how not to handle a crisis. The final blow came from an unexpected source: the European caviar supplier Mark had relied on for Horizon's menu. Facing mounting scrutiny from Seattle's food media, the distributor released a statement confirming they had warned Mark multiple times about import regulations and preservative levels. "Mister, Thompson was informed on multiple occasions that certain preservation methods used in our European facilities do not meet United States import standards. The statement read, accompanied by email records that showed Mark dismissing their concerns and insisting on cheaper, non-compliant options for their higher profit margins. The evidence was irrefutable, shattering Mark's claims of sabotage and exposing his own decisions as the root of the violations. Claire's departure was as swift and professional as everything else she did. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public statement, just a quietly updated website that no longer listed Horizon among her firm's clients, and a voicemail informing Mark that their contract had been terminated. Her absence left a void that Mark seemed incapable of filling. Without her media connections and crisis management expertise, he was left to navigate the scandal alone, and his every move seemed to deepen the hole he was in. Industry publications began running retrospective pieces, claiming to have noticed warning signs all along. Food and Wine published an article titled, "When Ambition Outpaces Ethics," using Mark's downfall as a cautionary tale about rapid expansion and corner cutting in the restaurant industry, a story that resonated across Seattle's food scene. Through it all, I remained silent. I didn't post celebratory messages on social media, gloating over Mark's failure. I didn't give interviews to the reporters who reached out after discovering my connection to him, their emails piling up in my inbox. I didn't even correct the neighbors and friends who assumed I was devastated by my husband's professional collapse, their sympathetic glances misreading my calm. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. My old design clients began reaching out, their emails warm and welcoming, as if they'd been waiting for me to return. Projects I'd abandoned years ago to support Mark's dreams were still there, alongside new opportunities I hadn't dared to hope for. A complete brand overhaul for a Seattle nonprofit, custom signage for a boutique hotel in Belltown, a full visual identity for a tech startup in Fremont. James's card arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the grand opening disaster, a simple white card on health department letterhead, bearing 4 words in his careful handwriting, "Favor returned, well done." I framed it immediately, placing it beside my business license renewal form, freshly signed with my own name, Emma Davis, graphic designer, not Mark's wife or business partner. For the first time in years, no one could erase my name from what I'd created, a small but powerful victory that anchored my days. 3 months after James's card arrived, I was reorganizing my home office, a space I'd reclaimed from the clutter of Mark's restaurant paperwork. Tucked between old design portfolios, I found a photo from our Taste Fusion days, a snapshot of Mark and me grinning like idiots, covered in flour and sauce stains, holding up the day's earnings, $63 and change. We looked exhausted, ecstatic, and completely in love with the possibility of what we were building together, our hands intertwined, our smiles unguarded. I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for sadness or nostalgia to wash over me, mourning what we'd lost. Instead, I felt an unexpected gratitude, not for the pain or betrayal, but for the clarity that had emerged from the wreckage, a clarity that let me see myself again. For months after Mark's cruel words, I'd tortured myself with questions, standing before mirrors, cataloging my flaws. Was I too quiet at his parties, fading into the background while others shone? Was I too plain compared to Claire's polished sophistication, her designer dresses, and flawless poise? Was I too ordinary for the elevated world Mark was chasing, a world of influencers and critics that had no place for me? I'd wondered how I'd become someone worth hiding, my reflection a stranger I didn't recognize. But sitting in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my rebuilt life, client contracts stacked neatly, design sketches pinned to the wall, business cards with my name in bold letters, I finally understood. Mark hadn't been ashamed of me. He'd been ashamed of himself, of the struggling, uncertain man he'd been when we started. I was a reminder of that past, the borrowed money, the failed pop-ups, the nights we counted quarters for groceries while he chased his dreams. Claire represented the untouchable success he craved. I represented the human struggle he wanted to forget. He tried to erase me because he was trying to erase his own history. Horizon eventually reopened as Ember after a month of renovations and what Mark's lawyer called comprehensive compliance upgrades. The yellow health department notice came down, replaced by a shiny new permit and a hastily installed surveillance system for the walk-in coolers. But the damage was done, a wound too deep to heal. The first week back, Ember served maybe 20 covers a night, a catastrophic number for a restaurant that needed 200 just to break even. The local food bloggers, who'd once competed for reservations at Mark's earlier ventures, now treated Ember like a cautionary tale, mentioning it only in passing, if at all. The Seattle Times critic, whose review Mark had banked on, wrote a piece that was brutal in its politeness. While the technical execution shows improvement, it's difficult to taste anything beyond the lingering aftertaste of poor judgment. The lifestyle magazine that had planned a feature spread on Horizon relegated Ember to a brief mention in their Second Chances section, a backhanded compliment that stung more than silence would have. The nickname that stuck was Merciless, the place that poisoned influencers. Food delivery drivers made jokes about needing hazmat suits when picking up orders. Local comedians worked Ember into their sets. Their punchlines met with knowing laughter from Seattle audiences. A popular food podcast dedicated an entire episode to Caviar Gate, dissecting Mark's failures as a case study and how not to open a restaurant, their analysis both sharp and unforgiving. Mark tried everything to salvage his reputation. He hired a new PR firm, not as prestigious as Claire's, but hungry enough to take on a damaged client. He offered free tastings to food bloggers, hoping to win back their favor. He partnered with Seattle charities, donating meals to homeless shelters and carefully staged photo opportunities. His smile forced as cameras clicked. Nothing worked. The rebrand to Ember was perhaps the most desperate move, its name so heavy-handed in its symbolism, rising from the ashes, that local food writers mocked it mercilessly in their columns and blogs. New menus, new color schemes, new everything. But the fundamental problem remained. No one trusted Mark Thompson anymore. Through all of this, I maintained my silence, a choice that felt more powerful than any outburst could have been. Mark seemed to expect me to gloat, to throw his cruel words back in his face, to claim credit for his downfall with a triumphant post or a tell-all interview. Instead, I gave him something far more unsettling: indifference. I was polite when we passed in the hallway, my voice neutral. I made coffee for 2 each morning without comment, the routine a quiet defiance. I continued to share our bed, my side neatly made, while building a life that had nothing to do with him. That silence was more devastating than any accusation, because it forced Mark to live with the truth every day, that I had helped build everything he'd achieved, and in trying to erase me, he'd erased himself. My design business flourished with a speed that surprised even me. Word spread through Seattle's creative community that Emma Davis was available again, and projects materialized faster than I could have imagined. A local nonprofit hired me for a complete brand overhaul, their mission to support underserved communities aligning with my own rediscovered purpose. A boutique hotel in Belltown commissioned custom signage, each piece a chance to flex my creative muscles. A tech startup in Fremont entrusted me with their entire visual identity, from logo to website, a project that reminded me of the designer I'd been before Mark's dreams consumed mine. Each contract, each sketch, each finished piece was a step toward reclaiming the woman I'd lost. The real transformation began when I started hosting Canvas and Conversation, small art-focused gatherings in our living room, a space once filled with Mark's restaurant plans. The first event was almost accidental. Sarah, a photographer I'd met through a client project, mentioned feeling isolated as a creative professional in Seattle's fast-paced scene. On impulse, I invited her over for wine and painting one Thursday evening, the dining table covered with watercolors and canvas. She brought her friend Maya, a jewelry designer navigating a painful divorce, her hands trembling as she picked up a brush. Maya brought her neighbor Elena, a writer struggling to finish her first novel, her eyes bright with the promise of creation. By the third Thursday, 8 women crowded around my dining room table, their laughter and stories filling the space with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. We painted watercolor abstracts, bold strokes of color mingling with tentative ones, and shared stories that ranged from hilarious to heartbreaking. These weren't networking events or business meetings, but something far more valuable: a space where women could exist as themselves, not as extensions of their jobs, relationships, or societal expectations. We were teachers, entrepreneurs, mothers, artists, but for 3 hours each week, we were just ourselves, creating without fear of judgment. I haven't painted since high school, Elena confessed during our 4th gathering, holding up a canvas covered in vibrant swirls of purple and gold, her face alight with discovery. I forgot how good it feels to make something that doesn't have to be perfect. I smiled, mixing colors on my palette, the act grounding me. That's the point, I said. We spend so much time trying to be what others need us to be. Sometimes we forget who we are when no one's watching. The gatherings grew organically, women bringing friends who brought sisters who brought colleagues. We moved from my dining room to the garage, then to a rented space in Seattle's Arts District, a loft with high ceilings and windows that let in the city's gray light. What began as an impulse became a small movement, a community where creativity and connection thrived without competition or pretense. I was no longer Mark Thompson's wife, or even Emma Thompson, the woman who'd sacrificed her career for someone else's dreams. I was Emma, designer, facilitator, friend. The name on my business cards matched the name on my art supplies, and both belonged entirely to me, a reclamation that felt like coming home. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who seemed embarrassed to be there, his eyes avoiding mine. Mark had filed quietly, likely hoping to avoid further media attention, the grounds listed as irreconcilable differences, a phrase so inadequate it was almost laughable given everything that had happened. I signed them without hesitation, my pen moving with a steady hand, the act of final release from a life that no longer fit. Last week, I was wandering through Pike Place Market, the air thick with the scent of fresh fish and flowers, when I noticed a specialty food vendor offering caviar tastings. A small crowd had gathered around his booth, their faces curious as he spooned tiny black pearls onto mother-of-pearl spoons. "This one's from a certified sustainable farm in California," he said, his voice warm with pride. "No preservatives, no additives, just pure flavor." I accepted the sample he offered, letting the caviar dissolve on my tongue. It was clean, briny, perfect, nothing like the adulterated product that had destroyed Mark's reputation. As I walked away, weaving through the market's bustling crowds, I found myself smiling. Some dishes, I thought, are definitely better spoiled. And sometimes, the quietest woman in the room, the one everyone overlooks, the one deemed unworthy of inclusion, she's the one who gets to serve the final course. She's the one who decides how the story ends. Ember closed permanently last month, its doors locked, its windows dark. Mark moved to another city, chasing a fresh start in a place where his name didn't carry the weight of scandal. I stayed exactly where I belonged, in Seattle, rooted in the life I'd built from the ashes of the one he'd tried to erase. If this story of quiet revenge had you cheering for Emma, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment was when James stepped into that dining room with his clipboard, knowing exactly what he was about to unleash, his calm professionalism a perfect weapon. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.